Mark, thanks so much for coming here today. Really appreciate everything you've done for us on the mold and the odor side and doing a lot of things with the guys and everything. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Enviroguard?
Yeah, sure. So Enviroguard, we're a chemical manufacturing company primarily. Right, we make products for mold, water, fire, odor mitigation, things like that.
Magic products, to be, right?
Right, they're pretty good. Yeah, they're pretty good. But you know, beyond that, it feels like half of our company is really a training and support company. Okay. Trying to put ourselves in our customers' shoes and thinking about efficiency and productivity, safety at all times, and of course, you know, let's be honest, profitability, right? It's important for every company to that offers great services like Crew to also be a profitable company so you're here for the community long term.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about mold itself.
Yeah.
How about the types of mold? I think that's something that comes up all the time about, you know, people hear the term black mold all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And we in the industry know that's not really a thing. And the simple fact that we need to have mold tested by a third-party lab most of the time, or all the time, to really get down to the roots of whether this is toxic mold and things. You have anything to say about that?
A couple things, right? Yes, there's millions of types of mold. I forget what the statistic is, but every year, so many thousands more species of mold are discovered, right? Which means that you're always, you know, keeping up with the latest, if you will, the greatest in mold. But, you know, it's not all been, you know, ascertained yet as to what every single mold is in the world. On the side of black mold, many people using those terms have either heard it and they're just regurgitating something they've heard before, or it's being used as a scare tactic. Yep. In either case, it's no good, right? We really pay attention more to, you know, condition, right? ICRC, S520 conditions of condition 1, 2, and 3, because on one side of that, you've got people and even other service companies claiming some magical no mold situation where we know a condition 1 environment is a perfectly healthy environment that mimics the outside fresh air that we breathe every day. And then, you know, we've got condition 2 with elevated mold spores in an area where testing can be helpful, especially in identifying, you know, the amount over that threshold of that outdoor air. But then we've got condition 3, which is of course visible mold formation on those surfaces. And then when we're at that stage, remediation is a no-brainer, right? So I think that there's a lot of times where in certain cases people can get too caught up in what kind of mold it is and not simply following professional strategies to remove it in the first place. Sure. Right?
What I think the key to that is there's no way from the naked eye to be able to look at a mold spore and tell exactly what it is. So
that's right.
Our job as remediators is to have the same remediation protocols no matter what type of mold it is. Because most of the time, we're not sending it into a third-party lab.
Right.
As soon as it's seen and diagnosed, the remediation process is exactly the same, right?
Yeah, I think that, again, what are some of the other things that people get caught up on? And that is like this use of the term antimicrobial, right? Well, in and of itself, mold remediation is a cleaning principle. It is not a killing principle, right? Okay. You don't want to use a disinfectant or a sanitizer on a surface before it's clean anyway. It's why in every single case, whether you're talking about a sanitizer at a grocery store or, you know, one from us, it's always going to say a pre-clean surface prior to use, right? Because sanitizers are meant to kill microbes, right? They're killing bacteria, they're killing viruses, they're mitigating the mold spore, or they're fungicidal, right? But they're not there to clean the surface, okay? So I think that too many people are caught up on disinfectants, antimicrobials, and you know, fungicides and things like that, and they're not spending enough time thinking about creating what the ICRC calls a visibly clean, dust-free environment, right? And that's core to the foundation, because then you go, oh, okay, we're trying to get this back to condition 1, a healthy living environment, by way of cleaning the environment first. And then you can supersede that from an indoor air quality standpoint with things like disinfectants and sanitizers, and with long-term moisture controls in place so that recurrence doesn't happen, things like that. Yeah, it's just the right order of steps.
Correct. So you said something interesting there. You said condition 1.
Yeah.
So I think the key to this is that what most people don't understand is that there's mold everywhere in the earth. Everywhere where you go, especially outside, there's mold in the air.
There's spores floating around everywhere, millions of spores.
Correct. Our attempt and what to bring it back to condition 1 is a standard deviation close to what the outside molecules are, and bring that inside, right?
You could think of it as a reset to the surrounding environment.
You're exactly right.
Right.
So what would you consider 2 and 3 then? How does that work?
Right. So, condition 2 is when we've got elevated mold spores in an area. Some of the places that we walked in today, you smell that musty smell entering, but you're not seeing any growth. Doesn't mean there isn't some somewhere, but it certainly does mean that you're in a condition 2 environment. It's a first indicator, right? We need to be sensible and use the senses that God gave us, and one of those is our nose to go, okay, my senses tell me that there's an issue here, right? And when you smell that musty smell and you don't see any growth, you're probably in a condition 2 environment, right? Now, can you do further testing, air quality sampling, things of that nature to confirm it? Absolutely, and some people feel more comfortable doing it that way. I've been probably around the industry long enough, 21 years, that you go, we got a problem, let's go ahead and fix that, right? But then condition 3, of course, is when we actually see physical mold growth on surfaces, whether it be on construction materials or painted drywall and things like that. We know we've got, of course, a condition 2 environment, which means we're above that healthy living threshold of the outdoor air, and we need to do something about it.
So you feel like there are a few different ways to remediate, all the way from something obtrusive as far as tearing out what's there, and then there's also many, many less obtrusive ways to make sure the home is healthy and safe, but not demoing the home where we have to put things back. We can clean and sanitize, right?
Right. Well, one of the reasons that we developed a mold severity indexing system was to help give ourselves, beyond just conditions 2 and 3, a visible way to share information with customers first, and to begin to prepare information to match expectations as we're working with customers. Sure. And to answer your question directly, yes, there are non-invasive ways to do it, but when we get into that inspection, our responsibility is to pre-test surfaces so that we can differentiate from maybe an area that needs to be demoed, right, to an area that doesn't require demolition and therefore no more or limited cost in those areas. It really helps us become discerning in the best interest of the consumer. And they understand it each step of the way when you go, okay, mold severity index 1 through 5, from elevated mold spores all the way through heavily embedded mold and heavy staining and potential for wood rot conditions, things like that. It gives you the scale that anybody can understand. It's helpful for me when I'm talking to your technicians and things. And we've heard how helpful it also is for homeowners, so that they just have that foundational understanding of, I always say, like, how bad it is, right?
It's a peace of mind thing, right?
It is, yeah.
So let's go into more detail on the mold severity index.
Sure.
You'll hear us talk about this a lot, the MSI 1 through 5, right?
Yeah.
Let's go into each 1 through 5 and
Yeah.
kind of talk through how that works and what insight that gives us into the project, so we know what levels we need to take it.
Yeah, sure. So MSI 1 is equivalent to condition 2. We're saying the same thing. We're simply saying elevated mold spores above the natural outdoor conditions, that is my condition 1 comparative environment. In that situation, we can remedy that through a system called Deuterion. Okay? That system is a chlorine dioxide producing system that back in 2013, the EPA came out with a study of the efficacy of chlorine dioxide at specific parts per million levels on mold spores, mycotoxins, and allergens. It was a fantastic 53-page study that went into depth on the efficacy of chlorine dioxide in that environment. The reason that that's important is when we go into an environment that is a condition 2 MSI-1 environment, it's not like you've got spores just over here that are elevated. And spores are invisible to the naked eye in the first place. So what are we going to do, play guessing games? No way, it's not worth risking it. But in that case, because chlorine dioxide is a gas, okay, we can actually deploy that gas as a fumigant into an environment and mitigate mold spores without being invasive and also without missing all of the nooks, crannies, and everything else that you would miss if you're just trying to wipe an area down and clean it up the best that you can in the first place. So it is actually a superior system for mitigating condition 2 environments and or creating passing clearance, which I'm sure we'll talk about, after a mold remediation occurs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can a mitigation technician look at a possible mold situation and just by looking at it tell what their remediation practices should be?
I think there we're asking two different questions, right? On one side, we have to be smart and manage liability for all parties involved, right? We want to make sure that good documentation takes place along the way. Now, speaking from experience, when I go from an MSI-1 to an MSI-2, where all of a sudden I see physical mold growth on the surface that's light and sporadic, that's the definition of an MSI-2, now I know that we've got a cleaning procedure that needs to happen, okay? Which is most likely, in that case, a wipe down procedure augmented by a Deuterion treatment, okay? Because remember, we still have, even though we have a slight, let's call it, condition 3 environment, we still have that elevated mold spore level in there. So it's not like we want to just focus on cleaning. We want to pervasively mitigate the spores as well, which are the breeding ground, if you will, for the fungus that is the visible part of the mold.
I think the beauty of your guys' system, Enviroguard system, is that those testing procedures, that we can go in and test certain areas of what we see affected, and it gives us on site in that mold situation, this particular situation, gives us almost exactly how we should go through the process of remediating that mold.
Right. Like, let's talk about an MSI-3, right? MSI-3s are what we see all the time on like bathroom ceilings, bathroom walls, things like that, where you've got light visible mold, but it's very, it's kind of consistent across surfaces, right? Okay. Hasn't penetrated through the paint coating film and things like that, but maybe you've got a good bit of staining there at the same time. A lot of times people automatically think, oh, that's going to be demoed. And that's where I find out about 90% of the time, homeowners especially, if they're working with a contractor like Crew who can actually offer React Extract services, is able to save them a lot of money, headache, and time by being able to React Extract those situations and get them back to normal in a day. So definition there, MSI-3, consistent but light visible mold on surfaces, sporadic staining. As we move into MSIs 4 and 5, that's where we get into embedded mold, right? So in an MSI 4, now we're talking, a lot of times we see this in like structural framing. One of the areas that it happens all the time is in what some of our customers call, I think is being used more pervasively now, and that is lumberyard mold, right? Where mold begins at the lumberyard, and through that process where it gets to the job site and then gets into a dry-in stage, and that becomes kind of an incubator for mold growth itself, right? All of a sudden you enclose in all of this wet lumber. It's like an incubator, High moisture content levels, high humidity is a breeding ground. And that's when we have embedded mold formation, embedded into the wood in that case, and a greater degree of staining generally accompanies that, right? Not that staining always has to accompany it, but most of the time we see those things kind of tracking with one another. And then finally in MSI-5 is when you get to not only consistent and or pervasive embedded mold, and consistent pervasive staining, but also the potential for like wood rot conditions, things like that. So this scale, again, that goes all the way from a very simple MSI-1 with elevated mold spores through something that, you know, potentially you have to replace wood members and those sorts of things, but knowingly so, and knowing how to identify that, and best of all, how to help educate and help the consumer understand the problem in a very simple way, has a lot of value.
I think the new construction piece of that, talking about lumber yards and it's really become, you know, with our newer woods today, we don't have the old wood that we used to.
That's
They're
right.
cutting down new trees and creating
Yeah.
hemper and dimensional lumber like that. Well, when it's coming from the yard, you see so many times you get bunks of wood, it's got mold all over it.
Yeah.
And I think that the builder just looks at it and just thinks that's staining or something that they just don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
They don't want to. But let's talk a little bit about how potentially dangerous that is once we put drywall and cover that mold up that's not been cleaned and remediated.
Yeah, and the first thing I would say here for maybe any builders potentially listening is this isn't your liability. You can be the hero in the situation, but it's
your liability, though.
right, from a non-disclosure issue or something like that.
Right.
But primarily, the reason it's called lumberyard mold is it's coming from the lumberyard, right? We've worked with many a builder now they've decided, you know, for best practices, for the health of their residents and the mitigation of their liability, they want to do something about it. And so we've put together a program in concert with many other, you know, manufacturers, OEM manufacturers of construction materials, you know, fire pipe and all these sorts of things to make sure that everything is aligned and that you know, everything passes clearance from their side too, so they know that, you know, products aren't going to ruin their materials. So let's go back to your question though. I got a little off track there.
No, it's okay. Well, I think it's also important for the consumer, you know, when you're building a home as the consumer, you're typically in the house during all the phases. Whatnot. You need to be paying attention and making sure, because it's just something that gets a lot of times, I think, just overlooked. It's just not something a lot of people on the builder side know a whole lot about, and we don't work with a whole lot of new construction as of now, but I really think that this is a market that's only going to grow on our end.
It is. You know, even in certain areas, we've found that, you know, especially in like multifamily construction, commercial construction, those sorts of things, we're beginning to see ASTM testing show up in those areas, code restrictions enforced in those where, you know, they will shut jobs down and things in places like Florida, Georgia, if mold is found during the inspection process. So it's better to identify it early and go ahead and have a program that's already set up, right, ready to go, differentiate between Condition 2 and Condition 3, react, extract Condition 3 zones, of course, sanitize all of their you know, wood members, and then put a long-term moisture control in place that's breathable to allow moisture to escape over time, but also moisture resistance so that moisture can't pass back through to those wood members and increase moisture content and result in regrowth.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the basis of mold, right?
Yeah.
Mold needs two things for it to live and grow, right?
Yeah.
It needs dark and it needs damp.
And it needs a food source, right? It needs an organic food source.
Okay, which is what?
Well, in this case, we've been talking an awful lot about mold, or I'm sorry, an awful lot about wood, and that certainly qualifies, right? That nutrient, it could be wood. I've gone into manufacturing plants that were completely glass and steel, but because of what they manufacture, in one case, I remember being at a production plant for drywall. And because of all the activity in there, the nutrient becomes all of the dust and everything that's in the environment, and then mold looks like it's growing on the you know, the glass, or it looks like it's growing on top of the metal, but really it's growing on top of that nutrient that's floating in the atmosphere. Yeah. So it can show up everywhere.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So any other details you want to share on the mold side?
Well, I mean, we've talked about severity indexing and you know, conditions 1, 2, and 3. that's a pretty good starting point for most people out there who just want to, I think, have the peace of mind that they understand, and also the expectations set right up front of what the end product is going to look like for them, right? That assurance that, okay, we've taken before, during, and after pictures of this process. We know exactly what our attic, our crawl space, whatever it happens to be, is going to look like. And that's an important component of maybe one thing that we haven't talked about yet, and that's real estate transactions, right? I think that there was a time when it was, I don't want to say acceptable, but maybe more prevalent to bleach things out, to cover, to paint over them, things like that. And
it'll go away.
Right. Unfortunately, there's this thing called non-disclosure liabilities, right? Which is when, let's say, we as a consumer intentionally cover something up, ignore something, don't pass a piece of information on that's important to the buyer side of things. And that, I think, more than anything, is one thing we want to educate the consumer about, because there are many companies out there who will just come in and do some form of stain removal, aesthetic treatment, paint over it, whatever the case may be, and they may not be up to date on ICRC S520 standards when it comes to proper, and I would add to that, legal remediation standards, right? And we sure don't want somebody to get bit in the butt because they just didn't know. So I think that by producing content like this, and for Crew giving me the opportunity to come and talk about this and act in the best interest of the consumer out there in the systems that we employ, but in their knowledge of things like non-disclosure liabilities, it's just all important to know.
Well, let's talk about the consumer. I mean, the beauty of working with a company like us, and why we work with you, is our knowledge of the material, right? The consumer has no knowledge. I mean, they barely know what mold is. They know that it's potentially toxic and dangerous. The problem is there are so many firms on the market today that just are cutting corners, and like you're saying, just using products that are just taking away the staining, making it look pretty. But we haven't actually solved the problem, and that problem will most definitely come back, right?
It'll definitely come back, because essentially mold is a moisture problem, right? And if we haven't eliminated, one of the terms that I love that we take from the pest control industry is conducive conditions. Anything going on in the environment that's going to cause the negative condition that you don't want. In this case, mold, right? Well, moisture, damp, dark places, the nutrient and things of that, areas that are nutrient rich are all going to be breeding grounds. And if we don't eliminate the source of the problem, it's going to come back over and over again. And like we said, we don't want to pass on any non-disclosure liabilities, both from the standpoint of the agent or the standpoint of the seller. But we want to make sure that people really understand that it doesn't take that much more to go ahead and have a certified, insured professional come out and do the job correctly, rather than having a fly-by-night organization who's going to spray some whiz-bang formula. We're going to
make it smell nice.
Right. You wouldn't believe how many times, and it seems like it's this rotating theme where you get these companies out there that you fog part A, you fog part B, you never even go in there, and somehow it's magically gone. It reminds me of this movie a long time ago with Jack Black, and there was this product that they came up with called Vaporize, okay? and the whole joke of the movie is that you could spray this magic stuff on dog poop and it just vanished, right? But in the end, they were running for political office, and they were like, where's the poop go, right? And everybody started asking this question, and it caused their demise politically as well. But there's no such thing as vaporize or mold poo, whatever, right? It's not magic. It has to be cleaned. And unless you're willing to establish that visibly clean, dust-free environment that we keep going back to and over again, it's just another product on the market, probably someone who doesn't understand the standards, taking advantage of the consumer.
Sure. One thing that we preach here is that at Crew is that when you see the presence of mold, there's typically an alternate reason why that mold is present. By the way of a water source or something penetrating something that it shouldn't.
Right.
That's the beauty of working with a company like ours, just because we've done everything in the home service industry, so we understand how the foundation works to the framing, works to everything else. So what we preach to all of our guys, that if mold is prevalent, that just by us remediating it to our fullest extent, if we haven't stopped the source, all we're doing once again is putting a Band-Aid on the customer's ultimate issue.
That's right.
And that's extremely important.
Yeah. You know, it's one of the reasons why step 4 of the IICRC S520 is recurrence prevention, right? A lot of people, even professionals in our industry, I think you'd agree with this, oftentimes stop short of recurrence prevention. But it's essential, right? If there's a passive moisture control or an active moisture control that's going to hold that environment at a condition 1 environment long term, then it should be employed, right? You know, just stopping short of performing remediation, but never to that recurrence prevention step is a mistake.
I think the reason for that is that step is the hardest part.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like,
right.
I know how to remediate mold. I've got to become Inspector Gadget to figure out sometimes where that water source is coming. Because even where it shows,
Right.
a lot of times that's not where it's coming in or where the issue is. You really have to know the building envelope or the building structure to be able to see these things.
And that's a good point, because you know, so many people come into this industry, granted, they just don't have the experience of working over time with the building envelope, understanding dew point, understanding how temperature and all these other things, let alone the moisture drivers themselves, impact a structure and how wicking moisture translates from an outdoor environment into an indoor environment. Yeah, you got to know a lot to be good in this industry, and there are only so many companies that are good. And that's why it's nice working with you guys, because, and we wouldn't if you weren't, but we know that you guys are good because you do understand the trades, you understand the building envelope, etc., that you have to put all of these details together during that assessment and really understand what is going on so you can truly remove those moisture drivers long-term from the equation.
One thing that I think that we do extremely well at Crew is we know our limitations. We're remediation experts, but not chemists.
Yeah.
I don't have a chemist on staff. You do. Why
Yes.
don't we talk a little bit about the breadth of knowledge that you guys have as far as how the chemicals actually are working?
Yeah.
I can see them working, but I have no idea why or how that's happening, but you do.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have been manufacturing since 1991, right? This is a second generation company now. And not only have we, been through the rigors of development over, 3.5 decades now of manufacturing, but in addition to that, we've partnered with a lot of companies along the way, companies like Dow and people like that, who we work hand in hand daily to develop new products that will solve these problems, whether it be on the moisture control side or whatever the case may be. Not that they're one of our only suppliers, but they're certainly a significant supplier to us.
A supplier that you'd know, right?
A supplier that anybody listening to this would know, and they go, oh, okay, well, that's notable. Yeah.
And that's a real deal company.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, and the beauty in my mind of your partnership with a company like Dow is the business is ever changing all the time. We're constantly seeing things that, wow, that didn't react the same way as the last time it did. And we can come to you and say, this is what we're seeing. You can actually change the dynamics of your products on the fly to give us different characteristics of the product, right?
That's right. So we were really founded as a development company to solve problems, right? I remember, as a kid, my dad going into textile mills and all these sorts of things, and he would always talk about problem solving. It's all he cared about was solving problems. And so I think that really translated now into the second generation with my brother and I, where we just inherently seek out how to solve problems. And it's allowed us over time also to vet vendors and things who are very problem-seeking as well, right? Some people just want to sell materials. Sure. Other people want to solve problems. And solving problems, for us at least, is where it's at.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah. But you're right. We develop new chemistries all the time. We ran into a situation in Georgia last year where we noted that, wow, in a lot of these, like in churches and places like that have high roofs where they're getting condensation consistently because they're hitting dew point, it's not unusual for mold staining and mold itself to form under, like polyurethane. And it's crazy. But how are you, if you don't remove the polyurethane, how are you going to do that? Well, that can get pretty messy. So then we developed a product that could actually, you could apply it to the surface, wipe the polyurethane away actually, and then extract that surface so it's a neutralized surface afterwards, and then repolyurethane in a very simple way that surface and bring it back to original condition.
Let's talk a little bit about staining.
Yeah.
When we get into MSI 3, 4, and 5, when we've got more embedded mold, a lot of times we'll go through our protocols and our steps, and we'll still see some staining in some of the products.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Pigmentation is stubborn, right?
Okay.
But pigmentation is not equivalent to mold. It's a sign that there was mold, but it's certainly not a sign of active mold, right? You can clean a surface and restore it to a pre-loss condition, and it still have a little bit of staining left behind, right? It can be stubborn, right? As we saw today, there are areas that no matter almost what you do, there's going to be a little bit of that staining behind. But that's not the problem. The problem is, did we get to the hyphal structure, which is the root system of the mold? Did we remove the spore from the equation? And did we remove any physical growth on top of that to get back to that visibly clean, dust-free environment? If the answer is yes, then we've been successful, regardless of a little bit of pigmentation staining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, the customer wants to see nothing there. Right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
That's honestly our goal.
Of course.
But I also don't feel right if it is stained,
Yeah.
just covering up the stain either, right?
Right.
It makes us feel like we're doing something that's shady, like our
Yeah.
competitors are doing a lot of times.
Yeah.
So we've got to find a balance in there where we can guarantee that we have solved the problem, even though there is some luster of that staining embedded.
And we went through this on 4 or 5 jobs today, right? And in most cases, all the staining was gone, right?
Yep.
In one case, there was a little bit of staining, on that stairway.
Yep.
Yeah, that you could still see. But again, that's not the problem. We want to make sure that we're going after the problem and not focusing on the staining alone and leaving the rest of the problem behind, like so many companies that unfortunately we run into nationwide right now.
Yeah.